Howdy everyone. So I'm working on this left brake line, or I'm sorry, this is the right brake line. I'm working on the brake line for the right brake. So initially all I had done was I used a piece of string and I very loosely routed where I think I want the actual brake line to go. So I started down at the brake fitting. And I just took a piece of string and I kind of loosely wrapped it around, loosely ran it straight up the leg and then across and up and then around and into the fitting. And then I added like another foot to that. And then I took that string, and since I have 1 foot square tiles on the floor, I just laid that string on the floor to give me a length in feet. And then I took the actual 1/4 inch spool of very soft aluminum brake line. I unrolled it to that same length and cut it. So this particular piece is about 8 feet long. So at that point, I went ahead and I cleaned up the one end. I cleaned up an end and deburred it and flared it and put the nut and the ferrule on, and I attached it to the fitting. Before I attached it to the fitting, I fed the brake line from the outside, this 8 foot long piece of line. I ran it in front of the gear leg here and then behind the rest of the engine mount, and then I was able to pull that line, pull the brake line through here so that I can manually bend it and then fit it up into here, check the fit, bring it back down, manually bend it, put it back up. So that's all I've been doing. Now that I've got this initial bend in place, I got the nut tight so that I don't jack the flare. It's not super tight, it's just enough to hold the shape of the flare. Now that I've got this initial bend in place, all I'm doing very methodically is working my way down and around the way that I think I want this line to run. And I'm going to start attaching it along the way. Just to help hold it in place. Once I get this leg in here the way that I want it, I'll probably attach it, and then I'll start hand bending the rest of this, attach it, hand bend, attach, and so forth. That's kind of how I had done this left leg, although this was a lot simpler. So I think it's a good idea initially to start with the left leg because it is simpler. It will just give you a good feel on how to bend by hand and how to make the attachments and different things like that. Kind of cut your teeth on this side, and then when you go to do the other side, you already have an idea of how you're going to do it. So I'm just going to continue to hand bend this line across and down the leg, and I'll come back in a little bit if there's anything exciting to tell you about. Howdy everyone. All right, I'm sitting over here on the floor. So I'm going to demonstrate how I choose to do these different tie downs that you see here. I don't know if you can see these very well, but I'm going to demonstrate how I do this. It's very simple. I just use a roll of duct tape. I like the Gorilla Tape because it's a lot more sticky, it's a lot more robust. And this is 2-inch wide Gorilla Tape, and all I'll do is I'll pull off a little bit of tape like that, and then I'll put my thumb where I want to rip it, and I'll rip not quite a 1/2 inch, maybe a 1/2 inch, just under a 1/2 inch, and I'll tear it. Well, that didn't work. Stand by. Always on camera, right? Works fine any other time. So if I pull this back, put my thumb where I want to rip it, and then there we go. So that is roughly a 1/2 inch wide, not quite, piece of 2-inch Gorilla Tape. And then I will find the location on the piece of tubing, such as in here, and I will wrap this around the tube. Now, I don't recommend that you pull it tight and wrap it around, because after you do that, it's going to try to unwrap, and it will kind of sort of pull and separate a little bit. So when you go around the tube, just kind of, as best you can, just try to stick it to the tube, but don't necessarily pull it. A little bit of tension is fine, just to keep it taut. But you don't want to pull on it really hard and really wrap it. You want to just kind of lay it around on itself. I know my hand's in the way, isn't it? Just like that. And then you kind of go around and make sure it's on. So that's one layer. So I'll do that twice. So I'll do another layer. Same thing, I'll just pull my tape back, figure out about how wide I'd like to rip it down, and then I'll stick this piece over top of the other piece. Now what you probably can't see is the piece that I put on, the end of it is right here. So when I put this piece over top of it, I'm going to cover that end of the first piece. I'll make sure I cover that first, and then I'll come around and I'll make sure that this is stuck, and then I'll pull it around over itself. And again, I'm not going to pull on this. I'll put a little bit of tension on it, but I don't really want to pull it, especially when you get to the end. You want to just kind of stick this down. You don't want to pull it, because it's just going to try to unwrap itself if you pull it tight. Something like that. And you can also see that I have switched over to tie wraps. And the reason I'm using tie wraps is because these tubes, for the most part, this one is not, but these are mostly horizontal tubes, so the tie wraps won't be able to slide too much. Even on this piece here, these tubes are what do I want to call it? They are they're a one diameter the whole length. They're a consistent diameter. They don't taper or anything. So if you get a tie wrap on here and you can't really slide it by hand, it's not going to go anywhere. These, of course, are not tight yet. That's why I still have the lengths on them. But I know, here's the thing, right? And if you guys haven't thought of it already, now that I bring it up, I'm sure you will. People have issues with tie wraps in the engine compartment. And I see the point to that. But this is very soft aluminum tubing. If there's a fire in here, it really doesn't matter what's holding this tubing in place. It's going to melt anyway. So if I were to use, stainless steel hose clamps or some kind of fancy Adele clamps in here, that's all great. The clamps will probably stay attached to the metal, but this aluminum tube is going to melt out from underneath them. So in theory, this should not be as hot down here as at the top of the engine. Is that true? Maybe that's not true. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Anyway, I'm using tie wraps. If you have a problem with that, don't use them. Come up with a plan B. So I'm going to continue to work my way around and get this line put in. I'll move the camera here in a second and show you what I've got done so far. But another couple of tips. When you're trying to bend a tubing around behind something like this is back here, or if you have a length of tubing like this, and this end of the tube is okay, but it runs uphill, and whenever you try to bring that tubing down, this end wants to pop up. Or in the case of this tubing back here, when you try to make these bends, you end up you make a bend in here and it ends up affecting the tube out here. One thing you can do is get yourself some scrap pieces of wood that are different thicknesses. Like this one, this is just under 1/8 thick. This is a little bit over 1/8 of an inch thick. And you can use these as spacers, if you will. So like in this instance here, I can put this piece of wood up underneath right here and hold it. And then if I pull the tube straight down, it will, this supported area here underneath the wood won't move, but the tube where I have my hand, it will move. So I can compress this down without affecting this part here that's supported. That's how I had done these bends in the back. I would just stick a piece of wood in here and bend it, and then move the wood, bend it, move the wood, bend it, and keep working it around like that. And I'll be doing it probably, this is off camera, stand by. I've got some tape here just because when I was running this length of tubing, it was rubbing up and down on this leg and marking it. So I put some tape on the leg to protect it. But as I go to do this curve right here to get around the leg, I'll probably do the same thing. I'll probably put some of this actually on the leg and then kind of work the bend that way. And then if I need to do anything here, I can put the piece to support it and then bend on either side of it, or bend over here and bend on this side. But this is a pretty good tool, just some scrap pieces of wood that you can stick underneath your tubing wherever you don't want it to move. And then you can manipulate it on either side. So, I think that's about all the great advice that I've got right now. I will spin this around and give myself some FaceTime. Howdy. So, let me do some more of this tubing stuff, and I'll get back to you guys here shortly.